Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Democrats take the trifecta, winning the House, Senate, and the presidency. What'll happen next? Chaos ensues as protesters storm the Capitol during the Electoral College vote, and more than 1.7 million people have died worldwide from the coronavirus in the past year. When will things get better? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former Montgomery County Council member Mike Knapp, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Marc Uncapher, and former membership director for the Maryland GOP, Phil Bell. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Looking back over the past 4 years, if there is any one truth you can say about the presidency of Donald Trump, it is this. Never has any American president been as controversial as the 45th president of the United States. Never has someone been more hated or more loved by the American people. Think of this. 27 million more people came out to vote in 2020 than voted in 2016. And while President Trump expanded his voting base by 12 million voters, Joe Biden received 15 million more votes than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. The old adage that people vote for or against the guy in office has never been more true. But notwithstanding election challenges that were launched questioning changes to election laws in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, it appeared when the Electoral College met on January 6th, there would be at last a final determination of the presidential race. Mike, the chaos that ensued Wednesday when the electors met with protesters storming the Capitol was as disturbing as anything most Americans have ever witnessed. What was your interpretation of events?
Well, I mean, I got to say, it's a hard one. There's a lot of emotions, but as somebody who's had the honor to serve our military for 10 years as an Army officer and be a Senate staffer for 5 years and sworn to uphold our state and county laws as an elected official and as a gubernatorial appointee, I have to say that yesterday was arguably one of the saddest in our nation's history. And it really wasn't, it was sad because of the storming of the Capitol and what the Capitol represents. But I think really it was that we had a sitting president that incited a group of followers to attack citizens of their own country and another branch of government, and that was executing its constitutional duty, and they did. I mean, that's the thing that's stunning. And I think, unfortunately, sadly, something like this has been coming for a long time since Trump had been elected. But honestly, I think it points that there are bigger issues that we've got to go back and address. Politically, that goes back to Clinton and Gingrich back in '94, and unfortunately created a caustic political environment from that time, and neither side seems to be able to engage with each other. Economic issues that neither party has addressed, and race. And if yesterday wasn't a clarion call for all of us to figure out how to collectively and realistically address these issues, I really don't know what is.
Well, there are a lot of different opinions, obviously, that have occurred over the past few years. Now, Phil, almost 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, and many felt that their grievances as to the handling of the election hadn't been heard or satisfied. So how are we going to address that issue?
Well, first of all, that's correct. The grievances have not been heard and they have not been satisfied. And I think one of the most things that anger me is how many times, whether we're talking about state officials, local officials, or federal, the response to any question has been, sit down, shut up, accept the results. No, if you question it, you're a conspiracy theorist. That is absolutely wrong. That is something that Democrats had railed against for years, whether it was the 2000 election, the 2004 election, or otherwise. And that's something that should never, ever be repeated. But frankly, to go a little bit beyond that, what I really found despicable about yesterday was so much of what the rhetoric was used. President Trump was being accused of inciting violence, which he absolutely did not do, as someone who sat and watched his speech, unfortunately from the comfort of my living room, but I did. And secondly, the idea that the Capitol was quote unquote stormed or otherwise, when we live in a country where the Capitol was actually bombed in 1971 by the Weather Underground, and when Code Pink was happy to disrupt meetings for over 2 decades, and yet there was no problem with those.
Thank you, Phil. Marc, I'm going to go to you because ultimately what both Mike and Phil are pointing out is that Americans need to be able to trust the election and the election process. And it seems that at least for the past 2 decades, since the 2000 elections, they do not. How can the nation survive if order and trust isn't restored to the national electorate?
Well, I think to be fair, that there was a good, election that was held. Certainly, there has been a lot of litigation, a lot of effort to try and challenge specific states. And at the end of the day, the case that was made was appropriate, in which the process allows to be done. But at the end of the day, that there wasn't really enough evidence to suggest that the election was anything but fair. And I think the real breaking point took place when, in effect, you're saying, well, all of that aside, the certifications, we're going to ignore that. We're just going to essentially adopt a completely unconstitutional process to try and reverse that. And I think that, in the eyes of many people, was really a breaking point.
Mike, I'm going to go back to you in a second, but I want to ask a follow-up to Marc. Marc, after the 2000 election, there was certainly a congressional panel that examined what went wrong in the 2000 election. Certainly, there have been enough allegations about voting irregularities, but also about how states addressed the election this year and changed their laws with respect to how voting was conducted. Shouldn't there be a national commission founded to study this, to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I certainly welcome that. I mean, there is regular and ongoing evaluation of it, and the various techniques and the various approaches. And you put your finger on a key issue, which was that this year, because we didn't have as many votes cast in person, we were allowed to have more mail-in ballots and more participated that way, which does create a whole new process. But I really got to say that the evidence that there was kind of wholesale fraud is just not there. I mean, every opportunity was provided to be able to come forward, again, appropriately so. You got to abide by the results at the end.
Now, Marc, I have to disagree with you. There have been plenty of reasonable allegations that were never looked into. A couple of days ago, Project Veritas, for example, came out with some video that showed how thousands of people were registered to vote at one homeless shelter in Atlanta. Now, is using an address like that illegal or inappropriate? No. But should we know who is registered, why, if they're legitimately citizens? The idea that applications for absentee ballots in Georgia, for example, were mailed out to everybody on the voter rolls. It is perfectly reasonable for someone who no longer lives in Georgia, but is still registered to vote in that state, to receive that application and say, hey, you know what? If the state thinks I should be able to vote, maybe I'll go ahead and vote. And looking to all of the other states that were discussed, the fact that we have something close to 7 where there are these questions, that should astound us.
Well, I think that reemphasizes the need for a national commission to examine this. But I want to go back to Mike, because I know, Mike, you disagree with what Phil said about President Trump's speech. And I'll preface this by saying that President Trump has a unique speaking style, and trying to parse through his words, oftentimes people hear different things, but I'll let you.
Well, they may, but I unfortunately had the opportunity to sit and watch his hour-long tirade as well, and I was astounded to have a sitting president to go on making the accusations that he did as fallaciously as he did, and then basically tell everybody, we're going to go march on Capitol Hill. In fact, I'm going to lead you there. Not that anybody actually, well, apparently some of the people who were walking thought he was actually walking with them. I don't think any rational person thought that was happening. And then, then they thought that it was okay to go do this. And Phil, with all due respect, because somebody else bombed the facility in 1971, in no way apologizes or acknowledges that what happened yesterday was right, okay, in any way a rational thing that could have occurred. I mean, just because a bad thing previously occurred does not justify what occurred yesterday at all.
I'm
Well, no,
sorry,
you're
Mike,
absolutely
but
right. You're
how
absolutely
many
right about
how
that.
many
But,
times
but the
do we
question,
march on the Capitol? Blacks march on the Capitol, women march on the Capitol, you name it. We all march on the Capitol.
Were
It's
they
our
were they
right to
were
do
they
it.
were they throwing things through the windows? I don't
well, this
recall
is,
ever
this
having
is,
seen that
this is
before.
I'll be interested to see, you know, in the heat of the moment, we look at the video and are incited by what we saw. It was terrible. No one can justify the violence that occurred yesterday. It was a terrible occurrence. But I'd like to understand what motivated some individuals, because it wasn't all, to actually take to the barricades and charge the barricades. Unfortunately, we're going to have to go. I mean, this is not a subject we're going to solve. It's terrible. We all should condemn it, but let's wait for the dust to settle to find out the root causes of what occurred yesterday. I would advocate. Going on to our next topic. It was announced on Wednesday that the two Republican incumbent senators from Georgia were defeated in the state runoff election. Obviously, that has a major impact on our governance. And so, Marc, what was the contributing factors to this stunning, what some consider a stunning reversal?
Well, I think you described it before when you talked about the general election turnout. Trump's presence had a galvanizing impact on turnout, but it was also a galvanizing impact on turnout both for and against him. And so while the general expectation is for these runoff elections and for Georgia, for there to be a kind of reversion to a mid-year or an off-year turnout, in fact, just the opposite took place. There was strong turnout by Republicans, but also that much stronger turnout on the part of Democrats.
So, Mike, now the Democrats have won all three houses of government, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, what's going to happen next?
Well, that's going to be really interesting. I mean, obviously, the Democrats now have a great opportunity to focus on getting real things done, focusing on COVID recovery, health, education, the economy. How do we bring these things and how do we pull us all back together again? And honestly, they've got to not worry about trying to show how right they were about other things and get distracted by every shiny object, but really have some discipline and show what it looks like to lead by getting real things done for real people. And I think that's going to be a challenge. It's a great opportunity, but now you actually have to do something with it. And, you know, as much as as a member of the Democratic Party, as much as I like to think we can do some things, we tend to get very distracted and discipline is not our forte. And I think there's an opportunity to really get real things done, and we've got to get there.
Well, there's particularly since there's a very narrow majority in the House. I think it's 10 seats, and effectively the Senate is tied, isn't it? 50-50, or what's the number? Is the
50-50.
50-50. So, I mean, the idea that there should be, and this I think our government works best when there's a need for compromise. Will there be an effort at compromise by the two houses of the Congress?
Well, if there isn't, I don't think you'll get anything done. And so I think that there is a real opportunity, you know, harkening back to what I said earlier, the two houses haven't worked particularly well together in a long time. And the two parties haven't worked well together in a long time. And now having numbers as they're structured now will force them to do that or get nothing done.
You know, Phil, I want to pivot a little bit from the general direction of what's going to happen in Washington to the criticism that some Republicans had coming out of the loss in Georgia was that the far right wing of the party can't win, that it has to be a more moderate party. How is the Republicans going to recover from these defeats?
Well, the model for moving forward is the same model that we've had for the last 4 years, actually 5, which is President Trump. Because the two candidates that lost in Georgia, they were very well connected with the business community in a state where the business community is very big. They were very winsome in their policy positions. They didn't go after the hot button issues. So frankly, they were those moderate candidates and they both lost. So when you look at President Trump was able to bring a fusion of people on the far right and the center, and even some on the left, the libertine/libertarian crew, that is a great formula for winning.
So I'm going to wrap up with Marc. Marc, given that if Phil is correct, And Mike is correct that we need to have a more of a consensus. And Phil is saying that the Republicans need to be more to the right. Will there be a workable government going forward in the House?
Well, both parties are have historically and continue to be unruly coalitions. Mike alluded to the Democrats and Republicans face the same phenomena, but that's also creates the opportunity for those folks who are more in the center on both parties to find common ground and work together.
Thank you, Mark. When we come back from this short break, we're going to talk about coronavirus, our favorite topic for the past 12 months, and how has the state handled the rollout of the COVID vaccine. Stay tuned. And welcome back. When this show last aired in December, we were just on the precipice of rolling out the much awaited and anticipated vaccine for the coronavirus. But also at that time, the state and county were in the midst of increases in the number of coronavirus infections and hospitalizations, which prompted both the state and the county to reimpose restrictions on restaurants and other places of worship that seemed onerous to many, but seemed necessary to the county. Now, 2 weeks later, the number of coronavirus cases continues to rise, but the rate of hospitalization seems to have stabilized since December 19th and may be falling. Phil, the long-awaited vaccinations and vaccines have been made available, and each state is responsible for handling the distribution process. How has it gone in Maryland? Governor Hogan has been under some criticism, at least up in Baltimore, for the process.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything really negative. To the reality is with Maryland, as with all states, there's always going to be a little bit of a, hitches here or there, hiccups, somebody complaining about one thing or another, especially because it's not like Tylenol where you can go out and just get it whenever you want. What I think is more noteworthy is how, going back to something you said in your question, which is how the testing process and some of the other things have been done, how we continue to have no standards on that, which is leading to a lot of false positives and ultimately a lot of the problematic restrictions that are unnecessary that have been imposed in advance of the vaccine.
Thank you, Phil. Mike, what's your view on how the vaccination process has gone so far, and also the response that the county has made to the coronavirus cases?
Well, I think it's been interesting because I listened to General Perna, who's responsible at the federal level, back in early October, and candidly, to listen to him talk about how we're going to massively address this and the efforts that were underway kind of made it sound like we're in good shape. And then I was seeing how the rollouts actually occurred, and clearly there's a number of disconnects between the federal, the state, and the local jurisdictions, which again, to Phil's point, I don't think is a huge shock that you're going to have some of those glitches, but given what I heard versus what we've seen, I think is a challenge. I think one of the things that I've seen I'm a little frustrated with at the local level is we've got kind of the categories of people who are supposed to get vaccinated in what order, but what I've not heard is then to what end? What's our plan as we do that? Why are we picking these populations? Obviously we want to get teachers vaccinated because ostensibly we want to get people back in school, but what's the plan for doing that? What's our plan for getting all those teachers vaccinated and talking about that, and then really having something that we're shooting toward? What's our North Star and what are we trying to get to? And I've not heard that. These are all kind of discrete activities. We want people to get vaccines. Then to do what? And I don't think there's that big picture that I just haven't heard anybody talk about yet, because ultimately soon we want to get back to being operational. Well, what are the steps we need to take to get there, and how do the vaccines play a role in that?
Well,
besides just in a macro sense.
I think that's been a criticism of the county since the beginning, is their transparency and their communication with the public. They seem to be top-down management oriented. Mark, what's your view on all of this?
I was going to pick up on that in observation, looking at other states that have run into particular problems with vaccine distribution. There seems to be a common thread to them of being overly prescriptive as to who and how the vaccines will be distributed. And then when enough people who qualify under that distribution plan don't come forward, the vaccines don't get used. And so a certain amount of flexibility is really necessary with the distribution in order to get things out, so things get done in a rapid way, and we get through this as quickly as possible.
Well, I want to leave with the segment with some anecdotal but positive stories, and two of the best that I've heard is one fellow, and I believe it was in Virginia, but it could have been in DC. He signed up for a wait list for the vaccination because once these things are thought out, they have to be used. And he was able to get vaccinated within 1 day because someone didn't show up to get their vaccination. They have 30 minutes or so to get there. And so he got vaccinated. So if your hospital has a waiting list and you want the vaccine, you may want to do it. And the other story was a couple, and I thought it was in Bethesda Beach, walked into a Safeway store and were told that they could get the vaccine right then and there. So I think if you want to get the vaccine, you need to explore a little bit, not just the government websites, but some other resources as well. And Carolyn is giving me the shut up sign. So when we come back, stay tuned for Parting Shots. And welcome back. I'm going to take a moment to lead off the segment today, sending out our thoughts and prayers to the family of Jamie Raskin and the loss of their son, Tommy. The loss of a child is never something that any parent should have to endure, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the Raskin family. Now with Parting Shots, Marc Uncapher.
Casey, I really wanted to echo your comments on that. I think that we've talked on this show in the past about the challenges of mental health in this particular environment, and appreciate the tragedy that suicide is for families. There really are, in addition to the loss of the loved one, really a deep impact on the family. So our prayers go out to the Raskin family.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp.
Thank you, Casey. It's amazingly, with all of the hope that people had at the end of 2020 moving into 2021, stunningly, things actually started out worse. So it's my wish that for the new year, that yesterday what we saw was really our low point for the country, and that we can really start the hard work of recognizing our problems and worry less about affixing blame and trying to be right, and more about listening, understanding, and reconciliation, and that our leaders at all levels can really work to facilitate those efforts, and those leaders that can't are just appropriately left behind, and we move forward.
Thank you, Mike. Phil Bell, your parting shot.
All right, thank you, Casey. My parting shot goes out to President Trump. I could really sum it up in 3 words: job well done. I think a lot of people really miss how great the last 5 years really has been. The MAGA movement was so diverse because you could have standing next to each other a transvestite and very strong Christians right next to each other with the same goals, which was to make the country great again. We enjoyed it. It was a great opportunity. As I read once, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And I think we've seen the greatest president of our lifetime, and I'm glad I was able to be there.
Well, as I led off the show this evening, I think the Trump presidency will be examined by historians for many years to determine the truth, that there seems to be 2 very strong sides to this story. But Phil, I'm surprised you didn't want to talk about the Jets and how that they blew their chance for glory by winning 2 football games and not caving at the end of the year. But more importantly, the Washington football team somehow managed to stumble its way into the National Football League playoffs. And let's hope that Alex Smith and his reconstructed leg is able to hold up through the pressure, and whatever success they have, they deserve. For 21 this week, I want to thank the panel for this first edition of this year, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest-hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.